The depot ran 22 hours a day, and the 2 hours it didn't were mine. That was the deal. Human medical officer on a Vethali transit hub, sole physician for a processing corridor that moved 4,000 bodies a shift through customs, biometric logging, and whatever bureaucratic gauntlet the compliance office had dreamed up that quarter. I'd taken the posting because the pay was real, and the alternative was a contract renewal on a mining platform where the oxygen recyclers smelled like wet copper. Vethali transit depots smelled like chalk and industrial coolant. I preferred chalk. The medical annex sat at the eastern end of Processing Hall C, sealed off from the main floor by a pressure door that never quite latched cleanly. I'd put in 3 maintenance requests. They'd sent me a form to confirm the requests. I'd filled out the form. Nobody came. I learned to prop the door with a supply crate and leave it. I found her on the 16th day of my rotation. It was the dead hours, close to the shift change, and I was pulling inventory on the equipment bays, a weekly task I'd inherited from the previous physician, who apparently had also filed 3 maintenance requests and received 3 confirmation forms in return. Bay 7 wouldn't open. I keyed the override, heard the latch disengage, and when the door swung back, I nearly walked into the thing before I registered what it was. She was sitting with her knees drawn up to her chest, back pressed to the rear panel, and she did not move. Sandy gold skin, the kind that Vethali children get when they've been eating poorly for a long time. Eyes like amber glass, enormous, fixed on me with an expression I have since tried many times to describe accurately. It wasn't fear. It was the practiced stillness of something that has learned very precisely when to be invisible. She was small. I won't say how small. Small enough that the bay, which held 2 portable defibrillators and a collapsed stretcher frame, had given her room enough to sit without touching anything. I stood there for a moment. Then I pulled the supply crate in front of the bay to block it from view of the pressure door, sat down on the floor so I wasn't looming, and said, in the 4 words of Vethali, I drilled phonetically from a transit phrase guide, that I was a healer and that I wasn't going to close the door. She didn't answer. She watched me. I got my kit and I did what I knew how to do. Vitals through a non-contact scanner. Temperature within normal Vethali range, slightly low. Pulse elevated but not dangerously so. No obvious trauma. Thin. Weary in the way a child gets weary when they have been managing their own fear for longer than a child should have to. I kept my movements deliberate and slow, and I spoke quietly, even though she likely couldn't follow standard, because the tone costs nothing, and sometimes the tone is the whole message. When I was done, I sat back and wrote my preliminary findings on my pad without flagging the system. Not yet. I had been in the depot for 16 days. In that time, I had processed 43 workers through routine clearance medicals, treated 2 sprained wrists and 1 case of transit fever, and filed paperwork in triplicate for all of it. I knew what the compliance office did with unregistered transit dependents. There was a standard transfer order, a holding facility designation on the far side of the hub, and a line in the processing manual that described the facility as a medical reassignment center. I had looked up the center in the first week because it was listed as a referral point, and a physician's instinct is to know where the referral goes. It took me 4 searches to understand what I was reading. I sat on the floor of my medical annex with a small alien child in an equipment bay, and I thought about that, and then I stopped thinking about it because thinking about it was not going to help either of us. I pulled up the intake form for a registered medical patient. Standard interstellar format. 3 pages, field by field. Name of attending physician, date of intake, chief complaint. I filled in every line I could, and for the lines I couldn't fill from a silent child I wrote, unable to obtain verbal history, nonverbal patient, pre-verbal presentation, full assessment ongoing. Then I assigned her a patient registration number. That number went into the Interstellar Medical Registry the moment I saved the form. Automatic. It was the same registry that every licensed physician on every signatory world uploaded to. The same registry that Treaty Article 7 of the Consolidated Medical Compact, ratified by the Vethali Authority 41 years ago, required all signatory governments to honor. Article 7 was not dramatic. It was 3 paragraphs about the inviolability of registered patients during active clinical assessment. Nobody ever invoked it on a transit depot. It had been written for field hospitals in contested zones. I saved the form at 0347 depot time. The compliance officer arrived at 0412. He was a junior officer, younger than I expected, carrying a handheld that displayed the standard transfer order template. He had probably been doing this for years and expected it to take 4 minutes. He presented the order. I read it. I set it on my desk without signing it and picked up my pad. He said the child was an unregistered transit dependent, and I was required by depot protocol to facilitate transfer to the holding facility, pending status determination. I said that was interesting and asked him to give me a moment. He stood there while I finished filling out the secondary intake page. I asked him, without looking up, whether he had a copy of the Consolidated Medical Compact handy, and in particular Article 7. He said he didn't, and that the depot protocol superseded external agreements on facility grounds. I said I understood that was the depot's position, and wrote it down in my notes, including the date and time and his name from the badge on his chest. He watched me write his name down. Then I turned my pad toward him and showed him the patient registration number, the file, and the timestamp, and I explained that the child was currently a registered patient under active clinical assessment, and that Article 7 of the Consolidated Medical Compact, to which the Vethali Authority was a signatory, prohibited removal of a registered patient during active assessment, regardless of facility protocol. I told him the file had already synced to the Interstellar Registry at 0347, and that any removal attempted after that timestamp would constitute a treaty violation, which I would be required to document, and which would be automatically flagged to the Compact Oversight Board within 24 hours. He looked at me for a long time. I looked back at him. He was calculating something. I don't know precisely what, whether I was bluffing, maybe, or whether this was something that would land on his supervisor's desk, and then his supervisor's desk, and at what point the cost of the child outweighed the cost of the problem I was now attached to the transfer order. I had made myself a problem. I had made his paperwork a problem. I had made the depot's paperwork a problem. That was all I had. I used every bit of it. He picked up the transfer order from my desk, folded it once, and left. I held very still until I heard the pressure door. Then I let out a breath that I had been holding since roughly 0347 and turned around. She was in the bay doorway. She had come out while he was there, I realized, and had been standing slightly behind my shoulder the whole time, without making a sound. I don't know what she understood of what had just happened. She was watching my face. I went and sat back down on the floor. She considered this for a moment, and then came and sat beside me, her back against the equipment bay, close enough that her shoulder touched my arm. I finished the rest of the intake form. There were 7 more pages of secondary assessment protocol to complete, which meant she was going to be in active clinical assessment for the foreseeable future. I was thorough. I have always been thorough. At some point, she fell asleep against my arm, her weight settling in with the slow ease of a child who has decided, for reasons of her own, to trust the particular arrangement of the present moment. I kept writing. The form was going to be perfect. It was going to be so complete, so precisely filed and time-stamped and cross-referenced, that nobody was ever going to get her out from inside it. Outside the pressure door, the depot ran its 22 hours. My 2 hours were my own. I used them the way I had always intended to, doing my job.